Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the humid harbors of southern China, where lanterns sway on bamboo poles, shadows slip between stacked crates, and the sea smells faintly of salt, fish, and something far less wholesome. You're perched on a rickety dock in Canton, today's Guangzhou, watching traders shuffle nervously, because the stuff being passed hand to hand isn't silk or tea. It's opium, sticky and dark, wrapped tight, hidden beneath barrels of rice. You hear the low slap of water against hulls, the wheeze of ropes, and voices muttering in English, Portuguese, and Cantonese, mingling in a low haze of suspicion. You probably won't survive this economy either, not because someone's going to push you overboard, but because everyone here is caught in a trade web spun from addiction. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love for you to drop your location and local time down in the comments. Always fun to see who's listening from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, you trail after a foreign sailor clomping across the dock, boots heavy with mud. He's carrying a small chest, the kind you'd expect to hold jewelry or coins, except it's packed with blocks of opium. Each block is stamped with a seal like a proud maker's mark, except here the brand doesn't promise family safe or farm fresh. It promises quick cash and customers who can't quit. The sailor hands it off to a Chinese middleman in long robes who tucks it into a cart piled with bamboo mats. No one blinks. Everyone knows. Everyone pretends not to. That's the rhythm of Canton at night in the early 1800s. Flickering lanterns, the stink of the Pearl River, and men risking fortune and execution over a drug. Britain's East India Company, oh yes, the same folks who once threw tea into Boston Harbor, has been quietly greasing this entire system. From their outposts in India, they coaxed farmers into planting poppies instead of food, scraped the sticky resin from the pods, and shipped it across oceans. You imagine some bureaucrat somewhere making tidy charts of profits, as if addiction could be neatly graphed like rainfall. Historians still argue whether these men thought of themselves as saviors of global trade or simply opportunists hawking misery. Either way, here in Canton, the truth doesn't matter much. You see Chinese officials in stiff silk hats, pacing the piers with lanterns, supposedly inspecting cargo, but half of them are bribed, half asleep, or both. Meanwhile, the British merchants grumble over their cups of watered-down gin about Chinese obstinacy. Funny how obstinacy looks suspiciously like trying not to let your entire country collapse under narcotics. As you wander deeper into the city, you notice the glow of gambling dens, the chatter of street hawkers selling roast duck and, hidden behind a bamboo screen, the unmistakable perfume of burning opium. The smell is sweet and acrid, like incense that's been left too long in the fire. One young scholar in a scholar's cap leans against the wall, eyes half closed, a scroll drooping in his hand. His essay on Confucian morals will probably stay unfinished. Nearby, an old fisherman puffs desperately, chasing away the aches in his bones. You realize addiction doesn't discriminate. Scholar or sailor, peasant or prince, all sink into the same haze. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some smugglers actually disguised opium as tea bricks, pressing the resin into shapes identical to those dark slabs of compressed leaves. Imagine the horror of pouring boiling water over that tea and discovering the world's sleepiest brew. It didn't happen often, people knew what they were buying, but the deception tells you how closely entwined the opium and tea trades were, like evil cousins at the same dinner table. Back in the harbor, junks bob against the docks, their sails furled like bat wings. On deck, men squat around low tables, slurping rice gruel before heading back to smuggle more. Silver coins clink, always silver, because Britain can't get enough tea and China insists on payment in cold, hard metal. That's the real problem. Britain's obsession with Chinese tea, porcelain, and silk has drained its silver reserves. And if you've ever tried to pay for groceries with monopoly money, you'll know why the British turn to opium as their sneaky solution. Trade something addictive, get silver back, then swap silver for tea. Voila. Problem solved unless you count the millions of lungs filling with smoke. You stumble past a patrol of Qing soldiers in quilted armor, spears glinting faintly. They march stiffly, pretending to keep order, but you sense their unease. They know the city is riddled with corruption. They know the governor receives reports of seizures and arrests, but also gifts from merchants who prefer business. As usual. You picture the emperor in Beijing, hundreds of miles away, still convinced his empire is unshakable. You almost want to whisper, "Hey, buddy, you might want to check your southern ports." A soft drizzle begins, the kind that paints rooftops silver and makes lantern flames tremble. You duck under an awning beside a young apprentice porter, his hair tied in a neat queue. He mutters that his master has lost 3 cousins to opium already. He says it like he's commenting on the weather. Resigned, ordinary. You can't help thinking about modern times, where people whisper the same stories about pills or powders, and governments still fumble with policies written too late. History repeats, just with different packaging. You wander back to the river. Across the dark water, a British factory building glows faintly. Factory meaning trading post, not clanking machinery. Inside, fat ledgers sit open, neat lines, tallying sales. You'd think they were keeping track of grain shipments or silk bolts, not human suffering. A clerk yawns, dips his quill, scratches another figure. Outside, a stray dog noses at a crate, then curls up against it. The crate is full of opium. No one cares. And you, stuck here in the drizzle, can only watch the city pulse with secret commerce. Both sides aware they're playing with fire. You sense the tension, heavy and unspoken, as if everyone knows this trade cannot last forever without consequence. You follow the rain-slicked streets inland, where the smell of the harbor fades, and another aroma takes over. Bitter, earthy tea. Canton is not just the city of smugglers and shadowy dens, it's also the beating heart of one of the world's most popular beverages. You duck beneath a bamboo awning where merchants in long robes weigh out leaves, their scales balanced with tiny brass weights, each movement precise as a surgeon's hand. Buyers haggle loudly, arguing over the difference between Dragonwell and Bohea, like modern folks might bicker about coffee beans. You take a sip from a chipped porcelain cup someone presses into your hand. The tea is grassy, strong, almost astringent. And as the warmth spreads through you, you realize this drink is the root of the entire mess. Britain has become absolutely obsessed with tea. Cups in the morning, cups at lunch, cups with polite gossip at 4. Imagine a society so hooked that even its navy captains insisted on their daily ration of leaves. You might chuckle, thinking how you panic without Wi-Fi for 10 minutes. They panicked without tea. But there's a problem. China doesn't want much of what the West has to offer. The Qing court doesn't crave British wool or their clunky clocks. The emperors think European goods are quaint toys at best. So the trade balance leans hard in China's favor, silver pouring east like water from a broken pipe. You can almost hear the groans of British accountants watching their coffers empty. One mainstream fact stands out here. Between 1700 and 1800, Britain's demand for tea skyrocketed from virtually nothing to tens of millions of pounds a year, and silver was the only acceptable payment. Silver coins glint in the candlelight of merchant counting houses, stacked neatly in cloth bags, then carted off toward China's vaults. You picture British bankers clutching their heads, muttering, "We're losing money on every sip." This wasn't just about taste, it was about national finances, the health of the treasury, and the sheer humiliation of watching your wealth drain into someone else's economy. Historians still argue whether Britain's ruling elite truly feared financial collapse or simply exaggerated the crisis to justify their schemes. Either way, ordinary people back in London just wanted their cup of hot comfort, not realizing each brew tugged silver coins across oceans. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Europeans initially tried to grow tea back home, planting seeds in greenhouses or small plots. Spoiler, soggy English gardens weren't exactly the misty mountains of Fujian. The leaves came out tasteless, more like boiled lawn clippings. Not exactly worth starting your morning with, so the dependency on Chinese imports only deepened. You step back into the Canton street. Merchants' voices overlap like birdsong. A man in a tall hat counts out silver taels with rhythmic clinks, while another rolls his eyes dramatically. He's been haggling for hours. A donkey cart rattles by, sacks of tea strapped tight. The driver whistles a tune you can't place. Everyone here knows they're part of something bigger than themselves. Every sip in Britain, every coin dropped here, ripples outward into global politics. You imagine the home front. In a cozy London parlour, a lady in lace gloves stirs her tea with sugar imported from Caribbean plantations. Another trade laced with exploitation. Her companion sprinkles in a splash of milk, a combination that horrified Chinese connoisseurs. To them, adding dairy to tea was barbaric, like pouring ketchup on fine wine. Yet that very habit, milk tea, would become the British hallmark. And behind that delicate porcelain cup lay warehouses emptying of silver, economies tipping, and merchants scrambling for a fix. Meanwhile, in Canton, Chinese scholars tutted about the greed of foreigners. They weren't wrong. The officials saw the silver inflow as natural justice. After all, wasn't Chinese tea superior? Chinese porcelain unmatched? Why shouldn't the barbarians pay dearly for luxury? The emperor himself believed China already had everything it needed. Foreigners were a nuisance, useful only as a source of silver and entertainment. You lean against a wall half hidden from the bustle. A group of young traders argues nearby. One insists Britain must find another commodity, something the Chinese actually want. Another scoffs, "Good luck. They don't even like our glassware." Someone else mutters about the rumors of opium sales, how quickly silver could flow back if only the market opened. They lower their voices, but you catch enough to realize a dangerous seed has been planted. The irony isn't lost on you. Tea, a drink meant to soothe nerves and invite calm conversation, is setting the stage for one of the most disruptive conflicts of the 19th century. Every time someone in London or Edinburgh sighs with pleasure over a steaming cup, another string tightens around the global web. You wander back to the riverbank as evening deepens. The glow of lanterns returns, but now you sense the undercurrent of silver obsession. Ships creak in the tide, their holds filled with chests of coins, guarded by men with muskets slung casually at their sides. They seem relaxed, but you can feel their unease. They're carrying treasure more precious than gold, treasure that keeps Britain's tea habit alive. The drizzle has stopped, leaving streets slick and shining like mirrors. You catch your reflection, a tired traveller caught between two worlds, one fueled by leaves steeped in water, the other by coins stamped with kings and emperors. And you realize you've only just begun to trace the path from a cozy cup of tea to the storm of cannons waiting on the horizon. You stroll further down the muddy alleys of Canton, and the smell changes again. No more tea, no more salt spray from the harbour. Instead, it's a heavy sweetness, almost like honey that's gone slightly rancid. That's opium. Not the burning smoke yet, just the raw resin itself. You glance at a merchant carefully slicing open a pouch wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, a brown-black lump glistens in the lamplight, sticky enough to cling to his fingers. He sniffs it with satisfaction, then presses it into a mold to form a neat brick. It looks almost innocent, like fudge you'd find at a fair. Don't be fooled. You trace the brick's journey backwards, imagining how it began in far-off India. Picture endless fields under a blinding sun, rows of green poppies swaying like dancers in a slow wind. Farmers, many pushed into this crop by colonial officers, wake before dawn and walk barefoot among the stalks. Each pod is scored with a small blade, and milky sap oozes out, drying overnight into a sticky crust. In the morning, they scrape it off carefully, scraping again and again, piling the resin into baskets. That's the treasure fueling Britain's answer to its silver drain. You bend down in your imagination, run your hand over a drying pod, and realize how small the gesture is compared to the tidal wave of history it sets in motion. One mainstream fact here. By the late 18th century, the EEC, British East India Company, had established a near monopoly over opium production in Bengal. They didn't deal it directly in China, that would have looked bad, but they licensed private merchants who were more than willing to slip into murky waters. The company claimed its hands were clean, but the ink in their ledgers told another story. Historians still argue whether Britain truly pushed opium on China or merely met an existing demand. Some suggest Chinese smugglers were already creating the market long before British ships arrived, while others counter that without the massive British supply chain, the addiction crisis would never have ballooned. The debate simmers, like tea. leaves at the bottom of a forgotten pot. Quirky tidbit for you. In certain Indian villages, poppy flowers weren't just for resin. They were tucked into pillows to help children sleep. Imagine resting your head on a cushion that slowly lulled you into dreams, courtesy of narcotic petals. Not exactly the kind of bedtime story parents brag about. Back in Canton, you follow a cart trundling along the street, creaking under the weight of sacks that definitely aren't filled with rice. The driver whistles off-key, trying to look casual. You notice his nervous glances. The sacks are destined for middlemen who'll slip the contents into hidden compartments in warehouses, or even hollowed-out logs. You can't help thinking about modern smugglers who hide things in car tires or under floorboards. The creativity is timeless. You duck into a low building, ducking your head beneath wooden beams, and find yourself staring at a group of men, weighing opium lumps on brass scales. The scene is almost ritualistic. One man scrapes, another weighs, a third seals the packet with a carved stamp. You notice the stamp bears the same symbol you saw earlier on the docks: brand recognition, 19th century style. Even contraband needed a logo. A young apprentice in the corner sneezes violently from the dust, earning a sharp glare from his master. You smile to yourself, realizing some workplace problems never change. Sneeze near the product and everyone panics. Through the window, you glimpse a narrow alley leading to a hidden back room. Curiosity tugs at you, so you squeeze through. Inside, men recline on low benches, long pipes balanced between fingers, smoke drifting lazily upward. This is your first encounter with an opium den. The air is thick, the lamplight dim, shadows stretching across sagging faces. One man mumbles in half dreams, another lets out a slow laugh that turns into a cough. A student stares at the ceiling, lips moving silently as if reciting poetry he'll never finish. You realize opium isn't just a commodity, it's becoming a culture. Pipes are carved from ivory or brass, bowls decorated with dragons, smokers debating the merits of different preparations like modern folks debate craft beer. It's decadent, destructive, and weirdly communal. But the danger hangs heavy in the silence between coughs. The Qing dynasty knows what's happening. Officials rail against it, edicts are posted, punishments threatened. Yet, here, in the heart of Canton, business flows as smoothly as the Pearl River itself. You step back outside into the humid night. Fireflies flicker near the water's edge, tiny lanterns against the darkness. A boat pushes off silently, oars dipping with barely a splash. You know what's in its hold. More bricks, more silver, more lives slipping into haze. For a moment you pause, leaning on a damp wooden post, wondering, could this all have gone differently? If Britain had chosen some other commodity, cotton, maybe, or machines, would the wars have been avoided, or was the collision inevitable, a clash of two empires unwilling to compromise? Historians still argue, and maybe they always will. You turn away, your footsteps echoing in the narrow lane, the sweetness of opium still clinging to your clothes. Somewhere ahead lies conflict, but right now, in this corner of Canton, the pipes burn quietly, and the silver clinks steadily into merchants' chests. You wander back toward the heart of Canton, where the wide avenues near the Yamen, the government office, buzz with tension. The night air carries a different rhythm here, less smugglers' whisper, more bureaucratic bark. You stop beneath a red-painted gate, where mandarins, those stiff-robed Qing officials with little black hats, stride in and out, faces set like carved jade. They're not dealing with your ordinary tax paperwork tonight. They're debating the growing menace of foreign merchants and the poison slipping into their empire. Inside, you overhear voices rising and falling like the clash of cymbals. One official slams his palm on the table. Foreigners must be expelled. They corrupt our people, steal our silver. Another sighs heavily, fiddling with his beard. Yes, but without trade, how do we keep the markets humming? The emperor expects revenues. The garrisons need food. You sense the room splitting along invisible lines. Moral outrage versus practical compromise. You trail your gaze over a scroll pinned to the wall, ink still fresh. It's an imperial edict banning opium importation, written in firm calligraphy. The words look decisive, but outside the yamen, you know a dozen carts are rolling quietly with contraband tucked under blankets. Law on paper, loopholes in practice. One mainstream fact hits here. The Qing court had issued multiple bans on opium stretching back to the 1720s. Each ban read stern and final, yet enforcement proved like plugging a leaking dam with chopsticks. By the 1830s, addiction had spiraled so far that even imperial soldiers and clerks were often caught smoking. Imagine trying to run an empire while half your staff are nodding off mid-meeting. Historians still argue whether the mandarins sincerely wanted to end the trade or merely wanted to appear loyal while quietly pocketing bribes. Some say corruption hollowed the system so thoroughly that even well-meaning officials couldn't resist the easy silver. Others insist many mandarins truly fought hard, only to be undermined by foreign firepower. Either way, the split inside this candlelit chamber mirrors the split across China itself. You step into the courtyard and watch a junior clerk scurry by, clutching a bamboo slip of records. He mutters about taxes being drained by silver flight. The empire, once flush with coin, now feels the pinch. You imagine the emperor sitting far away in Beijing, staring at a gilded map of his vast dominion, unaware how quickly the silver stream is drying up. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Qing bureaucracy required officials to wear little colored buttons on their hats to show rank. Tonight you spot one man fiddling nervously with his button, polished smooth from anxious rubbing. You can't help smirking. Bureaucrats then, like workers now, still fidget with their badges of honor when stressed. The mandarins stride into the night, robes brushing the stone courtyard, while foreign merchants grumble just outside the gates. You wander toward them, catching fragments of English and Portuguese. A stocky Brit mutters, "How dare they call our goods poison? It's simply trade." His companion chuckles darkly. Well, trade that sells itself. What fool wouldn't? Want silver back? They shrug as though lives are just numbers on a ledger. Around you, the city feels like a stage play. On one side, mandarins writing stern letters by lantern light, puffed with righteous fury. On the other, foreign traders smirking into their tankards, calculating how much more resin can slip through before dawn. And you're in the middle, listening to the crackle of tension. A gust of wind rattles bamboo blinds. Somewhere, a gong sounds, marking the hour. You picture a clerk hunched over his desk, drafting yet another letter to the emperor about seizures, confiscations, punishments. Yet you also know, just a few alleys away, another clerk is probably smoking in secret, the very thing he's supposed to suppress. You pause at a tea stall. The vendor pours steaming liquid into a chipped bowl, grinning at you with tobacco-stained teeth. Officials argue, merchants smuggle, but we still drink, he says with a shrug. He dunks his biscuit in the tea, as if that settles everything. Maybe it does. Still, as you sip, you sense the gathering storm. The mandarins may scoff at foreign poison, but the merchants aren't leaving. The smugglers grow richer, the addicts grow weaker, and the empire itself starts to wobble like an overloaded junk in rough water. You set down the bowl, the bitterness of tea clinging to your tongue, and glance back at the government gate. A guard yawns, leaning on his spear. You think to yourself, this empire's defenses aren't just against armies, they're against temptation, corruption, and smoke curling out of pipes. And tonight, those defenses look paper-thin. You drift, away from the yamens and tea stalls, deeper into the city's labyrinth. The alleys grow narrower, and the lamps burn lower, until you stumble upon a door cracked open just enough to let smoke curl out like a beckoning finger. You step through, and the world changes. The room is dim, walls stained with soot, the air thick enough to chew. Men and women lie sprawled on bamboo couches, pipes balanced delicately in their fingers, long stems tipped with little brass bowls glowing faint red. You hear a low cough here, a muttered dream there, and occasionally a half-hearted laugh that dies as quickly as it starts. This is an opium den, and you can feel the atmosphere like wet velvet pressing against your skin. You crouch beside one smoker, a scholar in a once fine robe now wrinkled and stained. His queue is uncombed, his eyes rimmed red. A half-finished scroll lies beside him, characters smudged where his hand drooped mid-sentence. Maybe it was meant to be an essay on Confucian virtue or a poem to impress the examiners. Instead, it's abandoned in favor of a pipe. You can almost hear him muttering, "Just one more breath, then I'll finish." A promise that never comes true. One mainstream fact stands out here. By the 1830s, estimates suggested millions of Chinese people were addicted to opium. It wasn't just poor laborers, scholars, merchants, and even officials were caught in the haze. The crisis wasn't only about health, it was about productivity, governance, and the empire's moral backbone dissolving into smoke. Historians still argue whether these dens were dens of pure misery or complex social spaces where communities gathered, mixing stories and songs with their smokes. Some accounts describe lively chatter, music, even gambling alongside the haze, while others emphasize only despair and decline. Maybe the truth sat somewhere in between, depending on the night. Here's a quirky tidbit. The elaborate opium pipe wasn't just a tool, it was almost a status symbol. Wealthy smokers commissioned pipes carved from ivory or inlaid with jade, as if decorating their vice made it respectable. Imagine someone today bragging about their limited edition vape pen, but with a dragon etched into the stem. You tiptoe through the den, the floor sticky from spilled lamp oil. A young man reclines with his head in his lover's lap, eyes fluttering, shut as she steadies the pipe for him. Nearby, a laborer in ragged trousers takes his turn at a communal bowl, sighing so deeply you'd think he just unloaded a lifetime of burdens. Across the room, an old woman fans the embers of her pipe, her fingers trembling but practiced, like she's been doing this for decades. The soundscape is strange, half lullaby, half funeral. Every exhale is a little sigh of surrender. And yet, you sense the attraction, the relief from pain, the softness of dreams, the escape from exams, taxes, hunger, grief. A smoky miracle, at least until the next craving arrives. You step outside again, gulping the night air as though it's clean, though even here, faint tendrils of smoke escape through cracks. The streets hum with normal life. Vendors frying dumplings, children chasing each other, boatmen shouting across the docks, and yet, just behind those walls, countless people are sinking into that fog. A beggar tugs at your sleeve, grinning toothlessly. He points toward the den you just left, shaking his head, then mimics smoking a pipe with exaggerated coughs. "All silver gone," he croaks in broken Cantonese. "All family gone too." He laughs, but it's hollow. You hand him a coin, and he wanders off, humming a tune that drifts away with the river breeze. You find yourself staring at the dark water, where the reflection of lanterns ripples like molten gold. For a moment, you imagine those lanterns as silver coins, tumbling from Britain's vaults into China's pockets, only to trickle right back out through addiction. It's a cycle, a loop, and you can feel it tightening like a noose around the empire. The den's sweet, acrid scent still clings to your clothes. You wonder whether, had you stayed, you might have been tempted to lie down, to breathe in, to forget. But you shake it off, chuckling lightly. "Not tonight," you mutter, as if to the ghosts of smoke behind you. Somewhere in the city, mandarins are still writing angry reports. Somewhere on the river, smugglers are unloading another cargo. And here in the alleys, the pipes glow and the dreams roll on. You wake the next morning with sunlight streaming down on the Pearl River, gilding the tiled roofs and the still busy harbour. The chatter of gulls mixes with the rattle of carts, but your attention is drawn not to the markets today, but to a stern figure whose name still echoes in Chinese history. Lin Zexu. You see him now, standing tall in his official robes, sleeves heavy, hat straight, his expression the kind of firm resolve that could freeze a river. He's been sent by the emperor himself, not to negotiate or to haggle, but to clean up the mess. And if you've ever had a boss who said, "Fix it, no excuses," you know the weight he's carrying. Lin Zexu sets up shop in Canton, and right away you sense the shift in the air. No more lazy guards pretending not to see smuggled crates. No more mandarins pocketing bribes while lecturing about morality. Lin is different, unyielding, disciplined, almost frighteningly sincere. He starts sending out letters, calling opium what it is, poison. You hear his brush scratching on paper, the strokes crisp and deliberate. His words are meant to shake not only smugglers, but also the foreign powers feeding the addiction. One mainstream fact stands solid here. In 1839, Lin Zexu famously wrote to Queen Victoria, appealing to her sense of morality. He asked, pointedly, why Britain outlawed opium at home but continued to sell it in China. You can almost hear his voice dripping with sarcasm. If it's too dangerous for your own people, why force it on mine? Historians still argue whether the Queen ever actually read his letter. Some say it was tucked away in bureaucratic drawers, ignored in London. Others claim it might have reached her, but was dismissed as the ramblings of a distant official. Either way, the words now echo across centuries, a moral indictment that still stings. Here's a quirky tidbit. Lin Zexu wasn't just a moral crusader, he also had a thing for public health campaigns. He ordered handbills printed and distributed, warning ordinary people of opium's dangers, almost like the 19th century version of an anti-smoking ad. Imagine walking through Canton streets and spotting posters saying, "Opium ruins families, don't light that pipe." You trail after him as he inspects warehouses, his gaze sharp enough to slice through wooden crates. Merchants shuffle nervously, palms sweaty because Lin doesn't take bribes. He's not here to be charmed. You watch him interrogate smugglers, not with shouts, but with cold logic, the kind that makes even seasoned liars stumble over their excuses. At night, he sits in his quarters, brush poised again. He drafts report after report to the emperor, describing the scale of the problem, pleading for action, vowing to cut the supply. Outside his window, you imagine the faint glow of opium dens still burning. The contrast is almost cruel. One man, writing with iron will, a city still half submerged in smoke. Foreign traders begin to panic. You overhear them on the docks, voices hushed but frantic. "This fellow is serious," one mutters, wiping sweat from his brow. "No more easy bribes." Another spits, "We'll see how long he lasts." These mandarins always fall eventually. But even as they mock, they tighten their belts. Lin has teeth, and they know it. You stroll beside him one evening as he walks along the river. He pauses, staring at the lantern-lit junks drifting silently. You wonder what he's thinking. Whether he believes he can truly stem this tide, or whether he knows he's standing against forces far larger than any one man. His jaw tightens. He believes he must try, whatever the cost. In the marketplaces, word spreads. Lin Zexu has come, people whisper. Some cheer. Finally, someone will fight the poison. Others scoff. Too late, too big, too entrenched. A shopkeeper tells you that even his cousin in the countryside has heard tales of Lin's crackdown. Hope and fear ripple outward like concentric rings in the river. The air grows heavier with expectation. The smugglers sense the noose tightening. The merchants write anxious letters back to London, warning that profits may dry up. And you, standing at the crossroads, feel the tension in every shouted order, every lantern lit, every whispered rumor. Something big is about to happen. And there Lin stands, sleeves fluttering in the evening breeze, pen still poised to strike, ready to write the words that will change the course of history. The lanterns of Canton flicker nervously now, as if even the oil lamps sense what's about to happen. You follow Lin Zexu down to the waterfront, where the warehouses loom like silent giants. Inside, stacked behind wooden doors and nailed-shut planks, lies the very heartbeat of the crisis. Thousands of chests of opium waiting to slip quietly into pipes and veins. But not tonight. Lin has decided. The poison ends here. He summons local laborers, soldiers, even curious onlookers, and under his orders, the warehouses are thrown open. You lean against a railing, watching as chests are dragged into the sunlight. The lids crack under hammers, spilling out the dark, sticky resin. The air fills with the pungent, almost sweet odor of raw opium, so thick it stings your throat even from a distance. One mainstream fact here. In June 1839, Lin Zexu's men confiscated and destroyed over 20,000 chests of opium, an amount weighing roughly 1.2 million kilograms. It was one of the largest government-led drug busts in world history, and it shocked both smugglers and statesmen alike. Historians still argue whether this was a symbolic gesture of strength or a reckless provocation that made war inevitable. Some see Lin's destruction of opium as a noble act of resistance, a statement that China would not bow to foreign corruption. Others insist it handed Britain the excuse it was looking for to fire its cannons. Here's a quirky tidbit. The opium wasn't just burned outright. Lin ordered it mixed with lime and salt water in giant trenches, creating a black, foul-smelling soup that was slowly poured into the sea. Imagine standing on the shore, watching waves churn with what was once worth millions of pounds sterling, drifting away like the world's most expensive sewage. You crouch by the edge, listening to the slosh of shovels, the hiss of chemicals reacting, the muttered curses of merchants whose fortunes dissolve before their eyes. One foreign trader clutches his hat, moaning that years of profit are vanishing into the Pearl River. A Chinese laborer nearby just shrugs, muttering, "Better the fish get it than our sons." You almost laugh. Dark humor, but pointed. The spectacle becomes something of a carnival. Children climb trees to watch, housewives peer from doorways, vendors set up stalls selling tea and dumplings to the crowd. Imagine going to a festival where the main attraction is watching barrels of narcotics dumped into the sea. Canton that week buzzes with equal parts pride and disbelief. And Lin himself. He stands straight-backed on a raised platform, expression unreadable. No theatrics, no gloating. Just steady oversight, as if this were a tax collection or a census, not the deliberate destruction of foreign wealth. You glance at his hands, folded neatly in his sleeves, and realize he's playing for history, not applause. The British traders are livid. You overhear their complaints in sharp, angry English: confiscated without compensation. Theft. They vow to report back to their government, to demand protection of their trade rights. You smirk quietly at the phrase, rights to sell. Poison. But to them, this is livelihood, legality, even honor. The scene stretches for days. Chest after chest cracked, resin poured, the trenches filling and draining. By the end, the shore reeks of decay, gulls circle overhead, and the tide carries away what was once the lifeblood of an empire's addiction. You almost expect the river itself to spit it back out in disgust. At night, you stroll through the city and hear conversations buzzing in every tea house. Some locals cheer Lin as a hero, saving their families from ruin. Others mutter that the foreigners won't take this humiliation lightly. You sip your bowl of tea, warm and grassy, and wonder which side is right. One night, an old fisherman chuckles at you as he casts his net. "We'll catch opium fish now," he says with a toothless grin. You laugh, but the thought lingers. What happens when even the sea has tasted the empire's poison? By the time the last chest is destroyed, Canton feels lighter, almost triumphant. Yet you can't shake the sense of a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Britain, after all, isn't exactly famous for shrugging off insults. Its merchants may fume, but its gunboats have louder voices. And as you lie down on your mat that night, the distant sound of waves lapping against the harbor feels less like peace and more like an army clearing its throat. The river lies quiet now, its surface deceptively calm, but you can almost hear the low hum of engines somewhere far off. Steamships. The British are coming, and they're not bringing tea and biscuits. You stand at the edge of the Pearl River Delta, eyes straining toward the horizon, and there it is. A dark shape sliding across the water, smoke rising from its funnel like a black banner. Gunboats, sleek, ironclad in parts, bristling with cannons, their decks crowded with red-coated sailors. Compared to the lumbering Chinese junks with their patched sails and creaking rudders, these ships look like sea dragons made of steel. The locals stop to stare, some whispering prayers, others cursing under their breath. You feel it too. A-chi-a-a. Chill, the awareness that the balance of power is shifting with each puff of coal smoke. One mainstream fact, the British deployed advanced steam-powered gunboats during the First Opium War, including the HMS Nemesis, often called the First British Iron Warship. With shallow drafts, they could glide up rivers where traditional ships could never go, making even inland towns vulnerable to their cannons. Historians still argue whether Britain had planned war all along, using Lin Zexu's destruction of opium as a convenient excuse, or whether Parliament truly hesitated before sending its fleet. Some claim public opinion in Britain was divided. Plenty of politicians and citizens criticized the morality of fighting for opium profits, but morality has a way of shrinking when money and empire are at stake. Here's a quirky tidbit. When the HMS Nemesis first arrived in Chinese waters, locals called it a fire-breathing devil ship. They had never seen steam power up close, and the sight of a vessel moving without sails seemed almost supernatural. Some even whispered it must be powered by demons. You imagine standing there, watching smoke pour from its chimney, wondering if the rumor might be true. You follow the scene as the first salvo erupts. Cannons roar, the thunder echoing across the riverbanks, shaking teacups in houses miles away. Thick smoke billows, acrid and choking, curling through the humid air. Chinese junks splinter under the barrage, their crews scrambling in panic. Muskets pop in futile reply, but it's like tossing pebbles at a storm. You watch one junk burst into flames, its sail collapsing in fiery ribbons. Sailors hurl themselves into the river, their cries muffled by the cannon's relentless boom. On the British decks, officers bark orders in crisp accents. Sailors reload with practiced efficiency. It feels mechanical, inevitable, almost industrial. The city of Canton trembles. Families clutch their children, shopkeepers slam shutters. Mandarins pace in their courts with beads of sweat glistening on their brows. The emperor, hundreds of miles away, receives reports written in flowery script that somehow fail to capture the smell of smoke and the sight of shattered hulls drifting downstream. You wander along the shoreline, stepping over splinters of wood, washed up by the tide. A fisherman's hut has been flattened by a stray cannonball, its roof caved in like a toy crushed underfoot. The family sits nearby in silence, staring at the ruins, too stunned even to cry. The sound of drums carries faintly from the British decks, a rhythm to keep the sailors' movements sharp. It clashes with the eerie quiet that falls between cannon blasts. You think of how far this is from London drawing rooms, where debates over trade rights were held in polished halls. Here, trade rights smell like smoke and gunpowder, and they leave bodies floating in the water. You pass a group of Chinese soldiers in quilted armor, spears in hand. They stand stiffly, their eyes wide, unsure whether to advance or retreat. One mutters a prayer, another grips his spear so tightly his knuckles whiten. They've trained for battles against bandits and rebels, not steam-powered monsters. You feel for them like asking someone armed with a slingshot to fight a tank. And yet, resistance sparks here and there. A cannon from the shore booms defiantly, its shot splashing dangerously close to a British hull. For a heartbeat, the crowd cheers. But the return volley shatters the cannon, sending stone and sand flying. The cheer dies in throats. As night falls, the gunboats anchor ominously, their lanterns glowing like eyes across the water. The river seems smaller, trapped under their gaze. You lie awake, listening to the creak of wood and the distant clank of chains as the ships prepare for another day. The silence between booms feels heavier than the booms themselves. And you know, this is only the beginning. Morning drifts in with a sticky haze, and you step out into the streets of Canton that now smell faintly of smoke and ash. People move, quietly, heads lowered, as if the city itself is holding its breath. The gunboats out in the river are still there, their black hulls looming like unwelcome guests who have no intention of leaving. And the first real clashes, those thunderous cannonades, have sent ripples of fear across the empire. You trail along with Lin Zexu's men as they rush to rally defenses. They inspect the city walls, fortify gates, and drag cannons into place. The clatter of wheels and the shouts of laborers mix with the faint drone of insects in the humid air. But even as you watch them prepare, it feels a little like kids piling sandbags against a rising tide. One mainstream fact anchors this moment. In late 1839, Chinese defenses at the Bogue forts, the strategic gateways along the Pearl River, were put to the test. These forts, massive stone bastions armed with cannons, were supposed to guard Canton from foreign ships. Instead, they quickly revealed how outmatched traditional defenses were against British naval technology. Historians still argue whether the Qing leadership truly grasped how severe the military imbalance was. Some believe officials clung to outdated confidence, assuming sheer numbers and fortifications would compensate. Others argue the mandarins were well aware of their weakness, but paralyzed by bureaucracy and fear of reporting bad news to the emperor. You can almost picture the endless debates. Scrolls rolled and unrolled, while outside the gunboats puffed smoke and waited. And here's your quirky tidbit. Chinese cannons were often mounted on wooden platforms that recoiled violently when fired. So violently, in fact, that sometimes the gunners themselves were knocked backward into the mud. Imagine the slapstick of trying to look heroic as your own weapon literally boots you into the ditch. Funny if it weren't so terrifying. You find yourself walking the crowded alleys of Canton, where panic whispers from shop to shop. A silk merchant mutters that trade will collapse. A baker frets that flour shipments won't come. An opium smoker, already hollow-eyed, shrugs and says, "War. Or peace, I still need a pipe." That last comment earns him a sharp smack on the shoulder from his neighbor. By the river, you watch the first organized battles unfold. Chinese junks, patched with banners, attempt to swarm the British ships. Their sailors beat drums furiously, the sound echoing across the water, trying to conjure courage. For a brief moment, you almost believe they might overwhelm the intruders. But then the gunboats open fire. One broadside, and half the junks are reduced to drifting kindling. You see the smoke curl into the sky, blotting out the sun. The surviving sailors swim desperately for shore. Some are pulled into small sampans by families, others sink silently beneath the waves. You stare at the river and think, how quickly the mighty can be reduced to wreckage. Back in the city, Lin Zexu walks with shoulders heavy, though his face remains stoic. You imagine the weight pressing down on him, duty to the emperor, duty to his people, and the awareness that the empire's armor has cracks too wide to mend. He continues sending reports, but you wonder, does he soften the defeats in his words, or does he tell the emperor the unvarnished truth? The emperor, far away in Beijing, reads dispatches that speak of skirmishes and minor setbacks. You almost roll your eyes. Minor setbacks? You just saw an entire fleet reduced to rubble in minutes. But that's bureaucracy for you, the art of calling a tidal wave a splash. At night, Canton feels restless. Lanterns sway in the humid breeze, and the smell of gunpowder lingers in the air. You hear distant cries from families packing their belongings, preparing to flee inland. Others hunker down, determined to stay, muttering that their ancestors built these streets and they won't abandon them to foreign devils. Walking by the riverbank, you hear frogs croaking in the reeds, oblivious to the cannons. Life goes on in strange ways. A child chases a firefly, giggling, while behind him a junk smoulders in the shallows. The contrast makes you shake your head, innocence skipping along the edges of catastrophe. And through it all, the British gunboats sit, anchored in the darkness, lanterns glowing faintly, silhouettes sharp against the horizon. They are patient, methodical, unhurried. You realize this war won't be decided in one clash. It will be a slow grind, a mismatch of patience and firepower, of bureaucracy and steam engines. The city braces, and you can't help but feel the walls of Canton are whispering. The storm has only just begun. The next morning breaks damp and grey, with mist rising off the Pearl River like a shroud. You trudge through the mud toward the hulking shapes of the Bogue forts, those proud stone guardians of the delta. Their walls, thick and weathered, bristle with cannons pointing out to sea. Soldiers hustle along the ramparts, their armor creaking, banners snapping weakly in the humid air. On the surface, it looks formidable, but you already know what's waiting beyond the haze. Out in the distance, the British gunboats idle like predators, black smoke curling lazily upward. Their cannons glint faintly as the first rays of sunlight filter through. It's almost theatrical, like the opening act of a grim play. You find yourself wondering if the forts are castles in a child's sandpit, impressive until the tide inevitably rolls in. One mainstream fact to plant here: the Bogue forts fell to the British in early 1841 after a series of brutal bombardments. Despite their heavy stone construction and large cannons, the forts were captured relatively quickly, exposing Canton to further attack and undermining confidence in Qing defenses. Historians still argue whether the Qing commanders truly resisted with all their might, or whether poor coordination doomed the defense from the start. Some records suggest confusion over orders, others hint at supplies being mismanaged, and still others claim the soldiers' morale broke under the sheer shock of British firepower. The debate lingers. Were the forts doomed by incompetence or by inevitability? And here's your quirky tidbit. Local villagers near the forts supposedly collected cannonballs that failed to explode, using them as makeshift weights for fishing nets or even as decorative garden stones. Imagine sipping your tea in the courtyard with a British cannonball holding down your potted plant. Dark humor meets home decor. The first shots come at mid-morning. A thunderclap from the river shatters the stillness, echoing across the mudflats. The forts return fire, their cannons booming in staggered rhythm, but already you sense the imbalance. British gunners reload swiftly, their shots precise, while many Qing cannons misfire, belching smoke but no iron. Some crews scramble to swab barrels, others fumble with damp powder. You climb a ridge nearby and watch as stone walls tremble under. Repeated bombardment. Chunks of masonry crash into the river with splashes that send egrets shrieking into the sky. Soldiers scurry like ants, some bravely hauling more powder, others bolting for cover. The air fills with acrid smoke, gritty, against your tongue, while sparks rain from shattered wood. You glance toward the villages clustered behind the forts. Families huddle in silence, clutching bundles of belongings. One old woman mutters that the gods must be angry. A boy beside her tugs nervously at his sleeve, asking if the dragon boats will save them. His father only shakes his head. By midday, the British advance with precision. Smaller boats ferry Marines ashore under cover of cannon fire. You watch their red coats flash through the haze as they scale embankments and storm batteries. Shouts rise, swords clash, and the guttural boom of close-range musketry drowns out even the gulls overhead. Inside one fort, a desperate counterattack erupts. Chinese soldiers hurl fire arrows and grenades, yes, crude gunpowder-filled pots, down upon the advancing British. For a fleeting moment, you think they might hold. Flames lick across the ramparts, and British troops stagger back coughing. But then another broadside from the river hammers the walls, scattering defenders like leaves. In a storm? By late afternoon, one fort lies in British hands. A Union Jack flutters above its battered walls, flapping stiffly in the river breeze. You feel a pang of unease. The sight of that foreign flag perched where dragon banners once flew feels like. The earth itself has tilted. The surviving defenders retreat inland, some limping, others carried on makeshift stretchers. You hear their muttered oaths, vows to regroup, to fight again. Yet their eyes tell another story. Exhaustion, disbelief, the crushing realization that the world they knew is slipping through their fingers. Night falls heavy. You wander the ruins. The stones still warm from cannon fire. Broken helmets lie scattered, mingled with splintered spears. A lone dog pads through the rubble, sniffing at charred timbers. In the distance, the glow of British lanterns flickers like stars against the Black River. And in the eerie quiet, you think of how these forts once stood as symbols of China's strength, its unshakable borders. Now, they are scars on the landscape, reminders that the empire's walls are not as solid as they seemed. You inhale the smoky air, taste the bitterness of ash, and know the dominoes are only beginning to fall. You wake to a different kind of quiet, the uneasy hush that settles after a storm, but before people have figured out how to live with the wreckage. Canton feels wounded, though the city hasn't yet been taken. The fall of the Bogue forts hangs over everyone like a ghost that won't leave. You hear murmurs in the marketplace. Some whisper that the British demons are unstoppable. Others mutter that heaven will surely punish the foreigners if the emperor prays hard enough. Meanwhile, you stroll past half-shuttered shops where merchants pretend business as usual, though their eyes flick nervously toward the river. Inside the provincial yamen, officials pace with furrowed brows, their robes swishing on polished floors. Lin Zexu remains the figure at the center, composed, dignified, yet clearly bearing the strain of reports written in his own hand. Losses, retreats, temporary withdrawals. You imagine how hard it must be to write those characters in neat brushstrokes, while knowing that each word carries the weight of defeat. Here's your mainstream fact. In 1840–41, the British captured key positions along the coast, steadily advancing closer to Canton. The psychological effect of these defeats was enormous, as Canton was not just a city, but the heart of China's foreign trade system. Losing it would be like slicing open the empire's purse. Historians still argue whether Lin Zexu could have turned the tide had he been given more resources. Some claim his determination was undermined by conservative officials who feared reform and modernization. Others say his downfall was inevitable, because no matter how noble his efforts, the Qing military was structurally incapable of meeting industrial Britain head-on. The debate circles endlessly, like a kite tugging against its string. And your quirky tidbit. During this tense period, Cantonese opera troupes continued to perform in tea-houses. Even while cannons boomed not far away, audiences gathered to watch elaborate costumes, painted faces, and hear high-pitched songs recounting ancient battles. Imagine the surreal scene, sipping jasmine tea, listening to tales of legendary warriors, while outside real warriors marched in retreat. Walking the city streets, you notice walls plastered with handwritten placards urging courage. Defend the homeland. Resist the barbarians. But beneath the slogans, someone has scribbled in, smaller ink. Resist? With what? Pots and pans. You chuckle softly, though it feels more like gallows humor than wit. The British, for their part, tighten their blockade. You hear stories of their gunboats prowling the Pearl River, intercepting sampans, cutting off supplies. Fishermen complain. They can't cast nets without risking cannon fire. A trader you meet mutters bitterly, "We built our lives on this river. Now we tiptoe as if it belongs to them." At night, you slip into a narrow courtyard where a scholar reads aloud to his students by lamplight. He quotes Confucius about virtue, about the mandate of heaven, about enduring calamity with righteousness. The students nod solemnly, but you see doubt flickering in their eyes. Philosophy is comforting, sure, but it won't stop a cannonball from splintering your roof. The city's defenses stiffen again, new walls patched hastily, cannons dragged into place. You watch soldiers drilling in courtyards, their shouts echoing under the night sky. Yet there's something brittle about their resolve, like bamboo bending under too much weight. One soldier jokes to his comrade, "If the barbarians come, I'll throw my boots at them." They both laugh, but the laughter rings hollow. From the riverbank, you see lantern lights bobbing on British decks. Calm, orderly, relentless. The foreigners don't seem in a rush. They have time on their side. You feel the asymmetry keenly, the defenders frantic and improvising, the attackers steady and methodical. It's like watching a chess game where one side is already down to pawns, while the other calmly advances with rooks and queens. Rumors ripple through Canton. Maybe the emperor will send reinforcements, maybe heaven will unleash a storm to sink the invaders. Some whisper that Britain itself is on the verge of collapse and will surely call its troops home. Listening to it all, you can't help a dry smile. Hope, it seems, is the last defense when walls are crumbling. You walk through the alleys one last time before dawn. The city smells of river water, fried dumplings, and gunpowder residue that clings faintly in the air. A rooster crows, defiantly loud, as if daring the world to keep spinning. And you realize Canton is bracing not only for another battle, but for the slow erosion of certainty itself. The empire's confidence, its conviction of superiority, is beginning to crack, one cannon shot at a time. You drift further south along the riverbank, where the smoke from past bombardments still hangs in a faint haze. But tonight, the city feels oddly alive. Canton, for all its tension, refuses to stop being Canton. Lanterns sway above narrow alleys, the chatter of bargaining echoes from stalls, and the smell of roast duck mixes with incense and sewage in the humid air. You weave through the crowd, realizing that daily life insists on continuing, even when war presses close enough to rattle windows. The marketplace hums. Merchants lay out bolts of silk, sacks of rice, bundles of bamboo. Foreign traders, fewer. Now, but still lingering, argue over prices with shopkeepers who eye them with equal parts suspicion and calculation. After all, coin is coin, even if it jingles from the pockets of men whose ships bombard the coast. Mainstream fact time. Canton in the 1840s was not just any city, it was the beating heart of China's foreign trade. Under the Canton system, foreign merchants were restricted to this port, where they dealt through licensed Chinese middlemen known as Hong merchants. This system had made Canton wealthy, but now its very structure was fraying under the pressure of British naval dominance. Historians still argue whether the Canton system could have survived longer had reforms been made earlier, or whether it was already doomed by the sheer momentum of global trade. Some argue the system's rigidity ensured collapse. Others suggest that if Qing officials had been more flexible, Canton might have remained the empire's proud gateway instead of its Achilles' heel. Here's your quirky tidbit. Cantonese. Street vendors sold little clay figurines of warriors and gods painted bright red and green. During the war, children sometimes smashed them in alleys, pretending the figurines were British soldiers. A little catharsis. Miniature revenge at 2 cents apiece. As you stroll, the sounds shift from the clatter of commerce to the lilt of song. You duck into a tea house, where steam fogs the wooden windows and patrons sip from delicate porcelain cups. On stage, an opera performer in feathered headdress belts out a tale of ancient loyalty. The crowd cheers at each sword flourish, their faces glowing in the lantern light. You notice something. The louder the cannons outside the city grow, the louder the applause here becomes. Maybe distraction, maybe defiance, maybe both. Moving deeper into the alleys, you find shrines tucked into corners. Offerings of oranges and incense crowd the steps. One shrine features a paper effigy of Guan Yu, the god of war, his red face stern and eyes bulging. Candles flicker before him, their wax puddles spreading slowly. A merchant kneels, murmuring prayers for protection, not just for himself, but for his trade routes. You almost chuckle. Even the gods here get asked to balance ledgers. In another quarter, you stumble upon a gambling den, hidden behind a bamboo curtain. Inside, men hunch over dice, their shouts rattling the rafters. Coins clink, fists slam the table, and so often someone mutters about the foreign devils between rolls. War, it seems, has become part of the small talk, tucked between wagers and boasts. The smell of Cantonian cuisine drifts along with you. Fried river fish crackles in oil. Steamed buns puff up in bamboo baskets, and someone hawks skewers of candied hawthorn berries, glistening like jewels. You bite into one, the sweetness sticky on your lips, and for a moment the war feels far away. Almost. Until you hear the distant boom of a British cannon test-firing downriver. Children run through the streets, kites bobbing overhead, some shaped, like butterflies, others like dragons. One boy runs past you dragging a kite shaped like a British gunboat, complete with smoke drawn in charcoal. The other kids laugh as it nosedives into the dirt. Mockery as survival skill. You admire the creativity. Back in the merchant district, the Hong houses loom with carved balconies and courtyards. Inside, negotiations still simmer. Some merchants, desperate, whisper about finding a way to accommodate the British. Others roar that compromise is betrayal. You lean against a doorway, overhearing an argument that sounds suspiciously like any modern business meeting. Lots of shouting, little resolution, and a shared fear of bankruptcy. As night deepens, the city glows with lanterns and firelight, as though determined to outshine the anxiety hanging in the air. You hear a peddler calling out, selling roasted chestnuts, his voice carrying brightly despite the gloom. Life, you realize, insists on carrying on, not because people forget danger, but because remembering it constantly would drive them mad. And as you lie down later in a crowded guest house, the murmur of voices seeping through the thin walls, you think about Canton's paradox. Here is a city vibrant, noisy, irrepressible, yet it stands like a candle flickering in the wind, strong for now, but with shadows closing in. You wake to a dawn that feels strangely familiar. Quiet river, gulls circling overhead, the creak of sampans tethered to the docks. But if you tilt your head, you notice something unsettling. Opium hasn't vanished from Canton. For all the grand proclamations, for all the barrels smashed and syrup poured into the sea, little paper-wrapped balls of the stuff still slip from hand to hand like whispers in the dark. You pass a tea shop where two merchants talk low, voices barely above the clink of porcelain cups. One says, "The bands are loud, the pipes are louder." The other chuckles nervously, glancing around, and you realize the trade hasn't stopped. It has simply bent itself into the shadows. Here's your mainstream fact. Even after Lin Zexu's dramatic crackdown in 1839, the opium trade surged back, with remarkable resilience. By the 1840s, British and American traders had re-established smuggling routes, often using small, fast boats to evade patrols. In fact, the trade eventually grew larger than before the First War. Historians still argue whether the Qing government ever had a realistic chance of stamping out opium altogether. Some say corruption doomed the effort. Too many local officials accepted bribes or smoked the stuff themselves. Others suggest that the sheer demand, from scholars to farmers to soldiers, made prohibition a hopeless cause. A law can be strict, but desire often wriggles around it. Your quirky tidbit. Smugglers sometimes disguised opium balls inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. Imagine biting into what looks like a nice crusty bun, only to discover a chewy surprise of narcotic resin. Breakfast of champions, or at least breakfast of people destined for a long nap. Walking deeper into the city, you wander into a small apothecary. The air reeks of herbs, camphor, and powdered rhino horn. Behind the counter, the apothecary eyes you and says, "For sleep, for pain, for worries." He points at jars labeled in flowing characters. Some jars are innocent: ginger, licorice root. Others contain the sticky brown resin of opium, tucked away but not hidden. Official bans aside, medicine shops often found excuses to stock it. After all, it was still considered useful for coughs, stomach aches, and toothaches. Out on the river, the smuggling becomes even clearer. You see small, sleek boats hugging the shoreline, sails trimmed low. At night, they slip out to rendezvous with larger ships anchored offshore. Lanterns flicker as cargo is transferred, crates disguised as cotton or tea. By dawn, the goods are ashore, tucked into warehouses, ready to move inland along secret caravans. In the alleys, you hear gossip of local officials turning a blind eye. One woman selling noodles mutters, "The magistrate raids one den today, then smokes in another tomorrow." Her laugh is sharp, but her eyes are tired. Everyone knows hypocrisy when they see it, yet everyone plays along, because to speak too loudly could bring punishment. Meanwhile, the British merchants count profits, smug in their counting houses. They justify the trade with elegant excuses. It balances the silver drain. Or, we provide what the Chinese themselves demand. You picture a modern version of this, like someone selling candy bars to kids and shrugging, "Well, they wanted sugar, didn't they?" Night falls, and you follow a flickering lantern into another opium den. The room is quieter than before, almost reverent. Smoke coils lazily, the air thick enough to taste. Men lie half reclined, pipes balanced between fingers, eyes half shut. In bliss, a scholar mutters poetry with words slurred. A soldier snores with the pipe still in his mouth. In the corner, a young boy tends the lamps, fanning embers to keep pipes glowing. His eyes dart nervously, perhaps already knowing he'll inherit the habit sooner than he should. The more you wander, the more you feel the futility of bans and proclamations. Opium is too profitable, too desirable, too entrenched. The crackdown had been dramatic, righteous, heroic even. But here you are, walking through smoky rooms where the habit thrives as though the dump into the sea never happened at all. By the riverside, you sit on a wooden crate, watching lantern light ripple across the water. A fisherman beside you mutters, "The emperor thinks he rules the tide, But tides don't listen to emperors. He spits into the river, then pushes off, his boat gliding into the night. You think about that, how some forces, once loosed, flow like water, unstoppable, indifferent, spreading wherever the land slopes low. And as you finally close your eyes, lulled by the creak of ships and the smell of salt and smoke, you realize the opium trade hasn't vanished. It's simply melted into the city's bloodstream. Canton, for all its resilience, is learning to live with a poison it cannot shake. You slip into the forbidden city, at least in your imagination, padding softly across cold marble floors where silence is so thick it feels like a second ceiling. The air is scented faintly of sandalwood and dust, and each corridor seems to stretch forever, lined with red lacquer doors and golden dragons glaring from beams above. You half expect to bump into a eunuch rounding the corner, but the palace tonight is eerily quiet. Here sits the Qing court, far away from Canton's tea-houses, far away from the gunboats prowling the Pearl River. On the dragon throne, the emperor receives reports that feel more like bedtime stories than battlefield updates. Scrolls arrive full of elegant calligraphy, but behind the neat brushstrokes hide evasions, excuses, half-truths. You picture an official nervously dabbing ink, trying to phrase, "We're losing control," as politely as possible. Mainstream. Fact for you. The Daoguang emperor, who reigned during the First Opium War, was infamous for being out of touch with what was happening on the ground. Reports from provincial officials were often distorted because no one wanted to risk angering the throne with bad news. By the time the court grasped the true extent of British firepower, it was already too late. Historians still argue whether the emperor himself was genuinely ignorant or if he chose denial as a coping mechanism. Some suggest he was misled by corrupt mandarins. Others claim he simply couldn't imagine that barbarians could defeat the Middle Kingdom. Either way, you're standing in a palace that feels like a bubble, ornate, fragile, and entirely disconnected from the chaos outside. Quirky tidbit. Palace officials were known to argue endlessly about trivial things, like how long the emperor's sleeve tassels should be during ceremonies, while ignoring pressing matters such as, foreign warships shelling coastal cities. Imagine holding a heated 2-hour meeting over tie length while the office building next door burns. You wander through the Hall of Supreme Harmony, where court rituals once dazzled with drums, bells, and a sea of kneeling mandarins. Tonight, it's empty, echoing only with your footsteps. You imagine those rituals continuing unchanged, the emperor receiving kowtows as if nothing had happened, because in this space, tradition matters more than urgency. Even as silver drains from treasuries, even as merchants smuggle opium by the ton, the performance of timeless order marches on. Out in the gardens, cypress trees cast long shadows under the moonlight. Eunuchs shuffle past, whispering about rumors. Rebellions. In the countryside, British ships capturing more forts. But when they approach higher officials, the whispers die. Best not to carry bad news upward. Bad news has a way of sticking to the messenger. You almost want to tap one of them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, maybe honesty's the better policy?" But then again, honesty here can mean exile, or worse. Inside the inner chambers, the emperor is weary. He complains of headaches, of sleepless nights, of the strain of decisions that feel impossible. Ministers fan him with peacock feathers, reciting soothing words, assuring him that the empire remains strong. And you wonder, do they even believe themselves? Or are they just buying time until someone else takes the blame? From the palace roof, you gaze out across Beijing's tiled skyline, stretching beneath the stars. Out there lies a country fraying at its seams. Farmers mutter against taxes, soldiers grumble about low pay, and smugglers thrive while officials squabble. Yet here, in the glowing halls of the Forbidden City, everything is ritual, ceremony, and delay. It's like watching a grand orchestra play while the theater quietly floods. Down a side corridor, you pass storerooms piled with tribute. Gifts from across Asia, jade carvings, ivory tusks, lacquerware. Beautiful, yes, but useless against ironclad steamships. The emperor walks among them occasionally, reminding himself of the Middle Kingdom's greatness. It's a kind of comfort food, except instead of ice cream, it's boxes of porcelain vases. By The time you leave the palace grounds, dawn paints the city walls in pale gold. Drums beat at the gates as guards change shifts, still marching with perfect discipline, as if nothing is amiss. And you realize, denial here is not just a choice, it's a lifestyle. The empire clings to ceremony because the alternative is too terrifying to face. So you trudge back toward the dusty roads outside Beijing, carrying with you the image of a court lulled by its own rituals, while beyond the walls the tide of opium. And foreign gunboats keeps rising, indifferent to silk tassels or carefully worded reports. You shuffle along a narrow dirt road, the soles of your sandals caked with dust, and you feel it, that odd prickly tension that comes when a storm is about to break, but the sky is still painfully blue. China, by this moment, is restless. Villagers in the countryside complain of bandits. Officials mutter of pirates and smugglers clogging the rivers. Foreign merchants, ever more confident after the First War, eye new opportunities. You catch yourself glancing over your shoulder, sensing that something bigger is on the way, though no one quite knows when the hammer will fall. Mainstream. Fact for you. After the Treaty of Nanjing, 1842, tensions never really calmed. The treaty's humiliating terms, ceding Hong Kong, opening 5 treaty ports, paying heavy indemnities, didn't end opium smuggling. In fact, trade grew, and Western powers pushed for even more privileges. The Qing government, weakened and demoralized, tried to resist while also juggling growing unrest at home. The stage was quietly being set for the Second Opium War. You pass through a village market buzzing with nervous energy. One farmer sells dried fish, another sharpens a rusty sickle. Whispers ripple among them. Rebels gathering in the hills, pirates in the delta, foreign devils demanding new ports. Nobody speaks too loudly, because rumor itself can attract trouble. Still, you hear the unease like a drumbeat beneath daily life. Quirky tidbit. Pirates along the South China. Coast sometimes flew multiple flags at once, Chinese, British, even Portuguese, ready to switch depending on who caught them. It's the nautical version of keeping different fake IDs in your wallet. Meanwhile, deep in government halls, mandarins draft edicts full of stern language. You overhear one reading aloud. All subjects must remain loyal, resist the temptations of opium, and ignore the foreign barbarians. The ink is bold, but outside the capital, those words travel slowly, if at all. By the time they reach Canton, half the messengers might already be smoking pipes themselves. Historians still argue whether the Qing dynasty's leadership could have chosen reform at this moment. Opening dialogue, strengthening the navy, modernizing. Institutions. Some claim the chance was there, squandered by hesitation. Others argue the weight of tradition and internal unrest made change nearly impossible. Either way, the empire trudged forward like a weary ox, ignoring the quicksand under its hooves. In Canton, foreign traders sip brandy in their counting houses, boasting about fortunes yet to come. The Chinese are stubborn, one says, but they'll cave again, they always do. You wince because arrogance rarely ends politely. Outside their windows, Chinese laborers load and unload crates, their backs bent under goods destined for foreign ports, their faces lined with quiet resentment. Further north, along riverways, you pass ragged groups of peasants joining rebel bands. They carry crude weapons, pikes, hoes, even kitchen knives, marching under banners painted with bold characters promising justice, equality, or at least revenge against corrupt officials. You notice one boy barely older than 16, gripping a bamboo spear like it's the only thing holding him upright. The empire seems steady from the outside, but its seams are splitting here, in the mud and hunger of villages like this. At night, you hear voices drifting from a tea house. Scholars debate with restless fervor. Should China learn from the West, or close tighter against them? One man pounds the table, declaring, "Their machines are impressive, yes, but their morals, barbaric." Another replies, "Better barbaric machines than none at all." The room falls into uneasy silence, cups trembling slightly in tired hands. Out on the coast, foreign warships linger like patient sharks. Their iron hulls glint in the sun, their cannons polished, their flags fluttering defiantly. Sailors lounge on deck, knowing they have time on their side. The empire may bluster, but the tide of trade and technology is rolling in, and it doesn't care about pride or precedent. You rest that night under a sky thick with stars. Crickets sing, distant. Dogs bark, and yet you can't quite relax. The air feels charged, as if the whole country is holding its breath. The villagers, the merchants, the rebels, the pirates, the foreign consuls, they're all circling each other, waiting for a spark. And you know, as you pull your cloak tighter against the cool night breeze, that spark isn't far away. You wake to the clang of hammer on iron, not from a blacksmith in some peaceful village, but from the forges of empire. Except these forges creak, sputter, and spark like machines that don't quite believe in themselves. The Qing government, under pressure from humiliating treaties and the steady grind of foreign gunboats, begins to talk of reform. The words drift down from high halls, carried on stiff edicts: modernize, strengthen, adopt new ways. But the reality on the ground is more like patching a leaky boat with paper fans. Mainstream fact: after the First Opium War, the Qing did make attempts to adopt Western-style weapons and techniques. Military officials imported some artillery, experimented with new ship designs, and even hired foreign advisors. Yet reform was half-hearted, fragmented, and constantly undermined by bureaucratic infighting. You picture mandarins arguing whether foreign cannons should be polished in a Confucian or Taoist manner before firing. Historians still argue whether these reforms were doomed from the start. Some say the Qing lacked the financial resources after paying indemnities. Others believe entrenched conservatism made true modernization impossible. A few optimists argue that, had reformers been given freer rein, China might have industrialized earlier. You hear all these debates like echoes in the halls, bouncing endlessly off dragon-carved pillars. Quirky tidbit: one reform-minded official proposed setting up a translation bureau to study Western science, but half the scholars assigned to it promptly fell asleep over their dictionaries. Apparently, translating trigonometry into classical Chinese is a guaranteed lullaby. You watch soldiers drilling in a dusty courtyard, some holding old matchlock muskets, others holding shiny new British-made rifles. They march together in awkward sync, like dancers at a wedding who can't decide between waltz and breakdance. Officers shout commands, but confusion lingers. Do you load powder first or ram the bullet? Half the recruits just shrug and wait for someone else to figure it out. In the ports, shipyards echo with the sound of saws and hammers. Chinese carpenters, used to building elegant junks, scratch their heads at blueprints for Western-style frigates. They try, but progress is slow, and funding is spotty. Meanwhile, British and French warships glide past with engines humming, as smugly as cats watching puppies chase their tails. At court, reformers plead for funds, insisting the empire must invest or perish. But other mandarins resist. Our culture is superior, they declare. Why should we learn from barbarians? You hear one elderly scholar scoff. Westerners eat bread that tastes like sawdust. What could they possibly teach us? The room chuckles politely, even as cannons thunder faintly in the distance. Outside the palace walls, the common people hardly notice the debate. Farmers still sow rice, fishermen still mend nets, and smugglers still ferry opium under moonlight. To them, reform is just another word in an edict, another sound of officials squabbling while daily life grinds on. You pass through a military workshop where young artisans tinker with foreign guns. One proudly shows you a rifle stock carved, with intricate dragons. See? He grins. Now it's Chinese. You nod, amused. Cultural pride meets practical firepower. But when he tries to fire the rifle, it jams immediately. The dragon looks fierce, but it's no help when the bullet won't leave the barrel. The frustration grows. Some generals believe Western knowledge should be embraced. Others cling to old strategies. The result is a muddle. Half modernization, half tradition, and no clear path forward. Like a man trying to row two boats at once, the empire is stuck in the middle, legs stretched dangerously wide. As night falls, you linger near a candle-lit study where reformist scholars pore over translated books. Their voices rise with excitement. Steam engines, railroads, telegraphs, the future gleams in their eyes. Yet you sense their enthusiasm is fragile, easily crushed by the weight of bureaucracy and suspicion. One scholar sighs, "Even if we learn these things, will anyone in power let us use them?" You step back into the cool evening air. The stars shimmer, indifferent as always. Somewhere beyond the horizon, foreign navies grow stronger by the day. And here, within the empire, reform feels like a hesitant shuffle instead of a confident stride. It's progress, perhaps, but the kind that limps when the world is sprinting. As night falls, you linger near a candlelit study where reformist scholars pore over translated books. Their voices rise with excitement. Steam engines, railroads, telegraphs. The future gleams in their eyes. Yet you sense their enthusiasm is fragile, easily crushed by the weight of bureaucracy and suspicion. One scholar sighs, "Even if we learn these things, will anyone in power let us use them?" You step back into the cool evening air. The stars shimmer, indifferent as always. Somewhere beyond the horizon, foreign navies grow stronger by the day. And here, within the empire, reform feels like a hesitant shuffle instead of a confident stride. It's progress, perhaps, but the kind that limps when the world is sprinting. You walk beside a muddy riverbank, the air heavy with the smell of sweat, rice husks, and faint smoke curling from campfires. Ahead of you, a ragtag group of peasants gathers under tattered banners. Their clothes are patched, their sandals worn thin, but their eyes burn with something fiercer than hunger, anger, maybe, or desperation dressed as hope. Welcome to the swelling ranks of the Taiping Rebellion, a storm so massive it makes the Opium Wars look like rehearsal. Mainstream fact: the Taiping Rebellion, 1850-1864, led by Hong Xiuquan, was one of the deadliest conflicts in history, costing an estimated 20 to 30 million lives. Hong, a failed exam candidate who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus, preached a strange mix of Christianity and Chinese tradition, promising equality, land reform, and the end of the corrupt Qing dynasty. You glance at his portrait. Nailed to a tree, stern eyes, long beard, a figure who looks like a prophet and a warlord rolled into one. Quirky tidbit: Hong banned opium, foot binding, and even certain hairstyles, but also declared that only he and his closest circle could interpret God's will. It's like starting a radical anti-haircut movement, but then keeping the scissors for yourself. The rebels you pass seem energized. One woman sharpens a spear while rocking a baby strapped to her back. A teenage boy straps bamboo armor over his chest, grinning with pride as if he's indestructible. They chant hymns that blend Chinese folk melodies with missionary-style lyrics. It's jarring, a mashup playlist of revolt. You feel the ground tremble, not from marching feet, but from the sheer scale of this movement spreading across provinces. Meanwhile, in the Forbidden City, mandarins mutter about bandits, as if words can shrink the problem. The emperor receives reports so grim they sound exaggerated. Entire cities captured, millions rallying to the rebel flag. Ministers reassure him, "This is but a passing storm." You want to lean in and whisper, "No, this is the hurricane." Historians still argue whether the Qing might have collapsed entirely without Western support against the Taiping. Some say foreign powers propped up the dynasty out of fear that the rebels' radical policies would destabilize trade. Others argue the Qing could have crushed the revolt eventually, though at staggering cost. Either way, the dynasty's survival became tangled with foreign interests, like ivy growing around a crumbling wall. Foreign mercenaries soon enter the stage. You spot Frederick Townsend Ward, an American adventurer, training ever-victorious army troops. Chinese soldiers drilled in Western tactics. Later, Charles Chinese Gordon takes command, earning fame and a reputation for discipline. Their muskets, bayonets, and strange marching drills seem alien in Chinese fields, yet effective. Watching them feels like seeing two worlds stitched together awkwardly but decisively. At the same time, opium remains a shadow character in this saga. Rebel leaders condemn it, branding it a poison of the old corrupt world. Yet smugglers keep thriving under both rebel and Qing territories, sneaking pipes into hidden corners. Even revolutions, it seems, can't stop supply and demand. You walk through a captured rebel city where new rules are painted on every wall. Men and women are ordered to live separately unless married. Gambling is banned, idol shrines are smashed, the city hums with zeal, but also a brittle edge. A soldier warns a merchant for selling wine. Another confiscates a woman's jewelry as decadent. You get the sense that purity this strict won't last forever. It's like trying to run a kingdom as a perpetual boot camp. Further along, you see battlefields littered with crude weapons, broken banners, and abandoned cooking pots. The deadliest battles of the era unfold here, with cannons booming, muskets cracking, and tens of thousands clashing in muddy fields. You step carefully through the muck, hearing distant cries of "Heavenly Kingdom forever," answered by the thunder of Qing cannons. At night, by a flickering fire, you imagine how exhausting it must be for ordinary villagers caught between two forces. Support the rebels and risk Qing reprisals. Support the Qing and face rebel wrath. Some try neutrality, but neutrality is fragile when both armies need rice, recruits, and loyalty. As you close your eyes, the chanting of Taiping soldiers drifts like a hymn in the dark, rising and falling against the backdrop of musket fire and clanging gongs. It is faith turned into a war drum, and you can feel why it terrifies the dynasty as much as it inspires the rebels. You rise before dawn to the sound of cannon fire echoing across the water, like thunder stitched with metal. The Taiping fires still glow in the distance, but now your gaze shifts to the coast, where foreign powers flex their muscles with unnerving calm. The Second Opium War is brewing, though the actors haven't yet agreed on their stage directions. Britain, never satisfied with enough, demands more trade, more ports, more rights. France, eyeing the same spoils, decides it would be rude not to join. Mainstream fact: the spark came in 1856 with the Arrow incident. A Chinese-owned but British-registered ship, the Arrow, was seized in Canton on suspicion of piracy and smuggling. Britain claimed insult to its flag and used the excuse to launch new hostilities. France joined in after a French missionary was executed in Guangxi. Together, they pressed demands that made the Treaty of Nanjing look tame. Quirky tidbit: the Arrow itself was hardly a noble victim. The ship had expired British registration papers, and its crew were likely pirates moonlighting as traders. Imagine starting a war over someone towing your friend's expired parking permit. It sounds absurd until you realize it was a convenient pretext. You stand on the Canton waterfront as British gunboats roll in, cannons bristling like teeth. Chinese defenders scramble, but their guns misfire. Their ships creak. Smoke rises, the air choking with gunpowder and burning timber. Civilians scatter, clutching bundles of rice, children, or simply their breath. You duck behind a wall, hearing the roar of broadsides pounding the harbour into chaos. Historians still argue whether Britain truly cared about the Arrow or simply wanted an excuse to demand new privileges. Most lean toward the latter, but the official documents dress it all in lofty language about honour and free trade. You almost laugh. Honour smells suspiciously like profit here. Inside the city, you glimpse Qing officials dithering. Some argue to fight to the death, others whisper about negotiation. The emperor, far away in Beijing, hears distorted reports. To him, it feels like another nuisance, not yet a full storm. But you know, standing in the rubble-strewn streets, that this storm will only grow. As weeks pass, British and French forces march inland, capturing Canton with alarming ease. You pass rows of foreign troops in neat uniforms, their rifles gleaming, their boots steady on Chinese soil. Local militias try to resist, wielding rusty swords and ancient muskets, but they melt against disciplined volleys. The clash looks less like a battle than like history itself refusing to wait. And yet, daily life limps on. In nearby villages, farmers still lead oxen through rice paddies, glancing uneasily at the smoke plumes over the horizon. Merchants haggle over dried shrimp. Children play in dusty alleys, pretending to be generals with bamboo sticks. The empire staggers, but the people still need to eat, trade, and laugh when they can. At night, you sit on a riverbank watching lanterns drift, each carrying prayers for peace. Some glow brightly, bobbing across the current, while others sputter out quickly in the ripples. The metaphor feels painfully on the nose, but you can't ignore it. China's hopes flicker in uncertain waters, while Western powers float forward on steam engines and steel. The foreign soldiers bivouac outside the city walls. They cook stews, polish rifles, and scribble letters home. One Frenchman sketches a pagoda in his notebook, trying to capture its curves with European lines. A British officer jokes about tea, claiming he'll bring back enough to bathe in. You roll your eyes, but the laughter carries a sharp undertone. It's the laughter of men who know the advantage is theirs. By the firelight, Chinese villagers whisper among themselves. Some hope the foreigners will curb corrupt officials. Others fear they will plunder worse than bandits. Neither side trusts the Qing court much anymore. You sense that loyalty is thinning, not just at the edges, but deep within the empire's bones. As you drift towards sleep, the echoes of cannon fire seem to merge with the distant chanting of Taiping rebels. Two storms at once, converging on the same weary land. The ground beneath you hums like a drum, and you realize you're not resting on soil anymore. You're resting on fault lines. You find yourself trudging along the dusty road northward, the trail packed with refugees carrying baskets, cages, and bundles that look heavier than their shoulders can bear. The Second Opium War is spreading, and the center of gravity shifts. Away from Canton, toward the heart of the empire. You trail behind foreign columns, their banners fluttering, their bugles sharp. They march with unnerving precision, as though sightseeing with bayonets. Mainstream fact. By 1860, Anglo-French forces pressed all the way to Beijing. They fought through the Taku forts near Tianjin, capturing them after bloody assaults and advanced inland. This was not just about Canton anymore, it was about forcing the Qing court itself to bow. Quirky tidbit. French soldiers on campaign developed a taste for Chinese chickens, sometimes carrying them under their arms like baguettes. Villagers quickly learned to hide their flocks, but not always successfully. One account describes soldiers marching with squawking hens tucked into their belts, conquering armies powered by poultry. You pass by the Taku forts, looming over the high river like stubborn sentinels. Chinese defenders fire bravely, cannons belching smoke, but their aim is uneven, their powder damp. British ships hammer back with disciplined volleys. The ground shakes beneath you, and the walls crack like tired teeth. You imagine being a soldier inside, coughing in the smoke, clutching an old musket, while iron shells scream overhead. The futility feels suffocating. Historians still argue whether the Qing ever stood a chance at Taku. Some insist that better. Leadership and preparation might have held the forts longer. Others point out the massive technological gap, modern artillery, disciplined infantry, naval superiority that made resistance nearly symbolic. You lean toward the latter, watching rubble tumble into the river with each blast. Marching inland, the Anglo-French forces find resistance sporadic. Villages sometimes fight back with bamboo spears, but more often they flee. You notice how foreign soldiers are both conquerors and tourists. They marvel at temples, sketch scrolls, and pocket. Curios. A British officer picks up a carved jade figurine, dusts it off, and says, "Lovely, I'll put this on the mantel." You wince at the casual theft, but he pockets it anyway. In Beijing, the Forbidden City waits like a sleeping dragon, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge that hunters are at the gate. Officials squabble about strategy. Some advise negotiation, others recommend fighting to the end. The emperor himself withdraws, uneasy and indecisive. Messages travel slowly, rumors faster. Courtiers wring their hands, but the tide already rises. Meanwhile, everyday life in the countryside seems oddly detached. Farmers plant millet, scholars sit exams, traders haggle over sesame oil. Yet, beneath it all lies a tremor, a sense that the dynasty is cracking. People whisper, "Can the Son of Heaven protect us if foreign armies march this close?" You join a caravan of villagers evacuating north. They pull carts loaded with furniture, chickens, even chamber pots. Children cry, elders stumble. Along the roadside, burned-out huts smolder, the smell acrid. One woman mutters curses at foreign devils, while another mutters curses at lazy officials. Both sound equally tired. As you near Beijing, the foreign troops begin building camps, hammering stakes into soil that was once considered untouchable by outsiders. Their campfires dot the horizon like orange constellations. They sing songs in languages that clash with the hum of cicadas, a strange symphony of occupation. You overhear officers discussing terms, more treaty ports, legalization of opium, foreign embassies in Beijing itself. The demands sound less like negotiations and more like shopping lists. You realize the empire's sovereignty is being carved up, piece by piece, like a roast duck passed around the table. At night, you wander near the edges of the encamped armies. The air is thick with smoke and sweat. Soldiers play cards, drink, and joke about loot. Some write letters home describing China as both exotic and frustrating. You think of those letters arriving in London or Paris, tidily folded, while the empire here lies bruised and bewildered. The moon glimmers faintly over the plain, cool and indifferent. You sit on a stone, exhausted, knowing the walls of Beijing will soon face their most humiliating breach. The silence before the storm feels almost heavier than the storm itself. The night sky above you glows faintly orange, as if the horizon itself were aflame. You press onward, following the tremors of battle and rumor until you find yourself standing at the gates of Beijing. The walls tower overhead, but the confidence they once projected feels hollow. Foreign troops mass outside, their cannons arranged. Like chess pieces in a checkmate, no one can deny. Mainstream fact. In 1860, during the climax of the Second Opium War, Anglo-French forces entered Beijing after defeating Qing defenders. When negotiations broke down and envoys were tortured and killed, Lord Elgin ordered the destruction of the old summer palace, known as Yuan, a sprawling complex of gardens, pavilions, and treasures. Its ruins remain one of the most enduring scars of imperialism in China. Quirky tidbit: among the looted treasures was a set of 12 bronze zodiac fountainheads, each representing an animal. Over the decades, these scattered across the globe, ending up in European estates, museums, and private collections. They're like the world's most controversial souvenir set, and debates about repatriating them continue even now. You wander the outer courtyards of Yuan before the flames reach. The place feels enchanted. Marble bridges curling over lotus ponds, halls filled with lacquered furniture, libraries of scrolls that smell faintly of ink and cedar. Foreign soldiers move through like tourists in uniforms, their hands brushing over silks and porcelains with greedy awe. A French officer lifts a jade bowl, holds it to the light and mutters, "Exquisite." His comrade shrugs, already stuffing scrolls into a sack. Then the torches come. The crackle begins softly, like twigs breaking underfoot before erupting into roaring fire. You feel the heat lick your face as flames swallow carved beams, painted ceilings, and bookshelves full of knowledge. A smoky wind carries away centuries of artistry in a single night. The soldiers cheer or joke, but some stand silently, even uneasily, watching the destruction. Historians still argue whether burning Yuan was necessary. Some frame it as punishment for Qing cruelty to captured envoys. Others condemn it as pure vandalism, a calculated insult meant to wound China's pride. Standing amid the flames, you can't help but think, whatever the justification, the loss feels immeasurable, like watching memory itself set alight. In Beijing streets, panic spreads. Officials scramble out of carriages, peasants pack their belongings in baskets, monks ring bells in futile prayers. The emperor, Xianfeng, flees north to Rehe, abandoning his capital. You picture him rattling along in a cart, clutching silk cushions, leaving his city to its fate. Meanwhile, the treaties are signed, under duress, but signed nonetheless. The treaties of Tianjin are ratified, granting foreigners new legations in Beijing, the right to travel inland, more treaty ports, and, most bitterly, the legalization of opium. You feel the weight of the ink heavier than any cannonball. This isn't just about territory anymore, it's about embedding foreign power directly into the empire's bloodstream. The day after the burning, you walk through the skeletal remains of Yuan. Charred beams jut out like broken ribs. Pools of water reflect only smoke. The smell of ash and lacquer hangs heavy. A local villager kneels, weeping quietly as he touches the blackened earth, as though hoping some fragment of the lost beauty still lingers. In the camps, British and French officers tally loot and casualties. Soldiers brag about treasures mailed home or complain they couldn't carry more. Some pose for sketches, holding Chinese artifacts like trophies. You try not to roll your eyes, but the arrogance is suffocating, and yet daily rhythms continue, as they always do. Market stalls reopen, selling roasted chestnuts and fried dough sticks. Children kick a rag ball in an alley. An old man plucks a two-stringed erhu, the melancholy notes carrying over rubble. Life doesn't stop for politics. It just adapts. Limping along with resilience, you can't help but admire. As the sun sets, you sit on a low wall near the ruined palace. The glow of embers softens into the cool blue of dusk. Cicadas sing as if nothing has happened, though you know everything has. The empire has been forced to its knees, its treasures scattered, its pride scorched. You close your eyes, breathing in smoke and night air, wondering how a dynasty already strained by rebellion and corruption can possibly recover from wounds like these. You wander through the streets of Beijing in the uneasy quiet that follows. Conquest. The city feels like a patient who has just undergone surgery, alive but shaky, stitched together with foreign thread. You see British and French soldiers drilling outside their new legations, their flags planted boldly in soil that had been closed to outsiders for centuries. The locals watch with narrowed eyes, pretending indifference, but their whispers carry sharp edges. Mainstream fact: after the treaties of 1860, foreign legations were established in Beijing. For the first time, Western diplomats lived permanently in the imperial capital, enjoying extraterritorial rights, meaning they were subject to their own nation's laws, not China's. It was sovereignty with holes poked clean through. Quirky tidbit. Many Beijing residents nicknamed the foreigners Yang Guizi, or foreign devils. But in private, some locals also poked fun at their odd habits, like putting sugar in tea, wearing stiff uniforms in sweltering heat, or growing impressive but impractical facial hair. The city may have been humiliated, but humor remained one of its coping tools. You drift past a tea house where scholars hunch over ink-stained tables. They debate in low voices. Should China modernize, learning from the West, or cling tightly to tradition? One insists, we must build factories and ships like theirs. Another argues, no, Confucian order is eternal. Their words hang heavy, like steam rising from the teacups. You sip along silently, knowing these debates will echo for decades. Historians still argue whether the opening of Beijing marked opportunity or disaster. Some say the foreign presence introduced new technologies, medicine, and ideas that nudged China toward modernization. Others claim it deepened humiliation, corroding sovereignty, and fostering resentment that would boil over later. As you stroll between legation walls and hutong alleys, you feel the tension, progress and humiliation braided tightly together. The everyday scenes around you are jarringly normal. Housewives haggle over leeks, children chase each other with kites made of old paper, a monk feeds stray dogs near a temple. Yet everywhere, the backdrop is different. Soldiers in European uniforms stand at crossroads, translators scurry with scrolls and strange goods, mirrors, watches, bottles of wine begin to circulate in the markets. You pause by the walls of the forbidden city. Its gates remain shut, a symbol of seclusion, but inside, the court frets. The Emperor Xianfeng has already died in exile, and his son, the boy Tongji, now sits nominally on the throne under regency. A child emperor at a time like this, hardly the stability anyone hoped for. You imagine him playing with toy soldiers, unaware that real ones still linger at the city's gates. Beyond Beijing, word of the empire's humiliation spreads like smoke. In distant villages, storytellers at roadside inns describe how the foreigners burned palaces, forced the emperor to flee, and now walk freely in the capital. Listeners mutter curses, sip their rice wine, and vow that the balance of heaven must, eventually, be restored. You sense the seed of resentment growing, even as people go about their ordinary chores. Night falls, and you drift through the foreign quarter. Oil lamps glow behind curtained windows where diplomats write letters to Paris and London. Inside, they sip imported wines and complain about the primitive food, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the bitterness they leave in their wake. You hear one joke about the absurdity of barbarian emperors bowing to the queen. His friends laugh, and you feel the laugh cut sharper than a sword. Meanwhile, in a nearby courtyard, a group of Beijing opera performers rehearse. Their painted faces and shrill voices rise above the city hum, a reminder that Chinese culture still thrives, even bruised. You watch a warrior character stomp across the stage, swinging a prop spear. His cry echoes into the night, defiant, unbowed, and strangely comforting. Sitting by a lantern-lit stall, you peel roasted chestnuts, savoring their warmth against the cool autumn air. The chestnut seller mutters, "Dynasties rise, dynasties fall, but chestnuts always sell." You chuckle softly. It's not profound wisdom, but maybe it's survival wisdom, the kind that keeps people going when emperors and palaces fail them. The stars glitter faintly above Beijing's smoke-hazed sky. You lean back, closing your eyes, aware that the Qing Empire has entered a new phase. Less isolation, more intrusion, and a growing tangle of contradictions. For now, the night feels deceptively calm, but you know beneath the stillness lies unrest, waiting for its chance to flare again. The streets grow quieter as autumn edges into winter. You stroll along a frozen canal near Beijing, the ice creaking, under the weight of fisherfolk hacking holes with iron tools. Life looks steady on the surface, but you feel the empire's pulse skipping. The defeats of the Opium Wars aren't isolated disasters. They ripple through society, seeping into how people work, eat, study, and dream. Mainstream fact. After the Second Opium War, China opened even more treaty ports, saw opium imports spike dramatically, and endured further territorial concessions. The result wasn't just political humiliation, but economic strain. Silver drained steadily out of the country, while opium addiction hollowed out households and workforces. Quirky tidbit. Some opium dens decorated their interiors like cozy lounges, complete with painted scrolls and low pillows. A few even offered musical performances, as though smoking your way into oblivion deserved its own soundtrack. Think of it as the 19th century version of a questionable late-night karaoke bar. You sit in a village courtyard and watch a family sort rice. The father coughs frequently. Opium has weakened his lungs. The mother scolds him for selling grain to buy another pipe's worth. Their son, barely 12, mutters that he'll run away to Canton to make money like foreigners. The family is fractured not just by poverty, but by the quiet poison flowing through their home. Historians still argue whether opium alone caused China's economic troubles or whether larger structural issues, corruption, weak bureaucracy, resistance to reform, were the deeper culprits. Maybe it was both, like two hands pressing down on a single chest until breathing became a struggle. As you travel, you notice opium's shadow stretching far. In riverside towns, you pass men dozing in smoke-filled rooms, their pipes clutched like babies. In fields, weeds choke neglected crops. In markets, pawnbrokers thrive, their stalls piled with heirlooms traded for another hit. Yet alongside decay, you glimpse resilience, women running shops with sharp eyes, grandparents caring for children, small temples still ringing bells for festivals. In cities, foreign merchants grow rich. They strut through treaty ports with pocket watches and walking sticks, their warehouses stacked with chests of tea, bales of silk, and mountains of opium bricks. You overhear one bragging that China will buy until kingdom come. You grit your teeth because it feels less like trade and more like feeding an open wound. Meanwhile, intellectuals debate salvation. Some call for adopting Western science, building railroads and factories. Others insist that restoring moral discipline through Confucian teachings is the key. Pamphlets circulate, voices rise, and yet nothing coherent takes hold. The empire feels like a ship with too many captains shouting contradictory orders while the hull still leaks. You walk through a crumbling temple one afternoon, its paint peeling, its statues chipped. A monk sweeps the courtyard, humming softly. You ask him if the empire can endure. He smiles sadly and replies, "Dynasties come and go. The people remain." His broom sweeps steadily, as though that simple act is more important than all the treaties and wars. In a nearby village, you join a festival where lanterns glow red against the night sky. Children laugh, firecrackers pop, and for a few hours, people seem to forget their hardships. Yet as the lanterns drift upward, you notice one old man staring not at the sky, but at the ground, shaking his head. Perhaps he sees the cost of survival more clearly than the children do. Back in Beijing, the foreign legations hum with activity. New roads are planned, telegraph lines discussed, and missionary schools proposed. These changes promise progress, yet also stir unease. Parents whisper doubts. Will children forget their ancestors' ways if they learn English hymns and arithmetic? You feel the tug of war inside every household, a quiet clash of worlds as sharp as any battlefield. By late winter, snow coats the rooftops of hutongs. You sit at a food stall, sipping hot millet porridge, listening to the chatter of locals. Some speak hopefully of new inventions, others bitterly predict further humiliation. The porridge warms your throat, but their words leave a chill. The empire feels like a candle guttering in the wind, still alight, but unsteady, uncertain. You lean back, watching smoke curl into the cold night sky. The Opium Wars may be over on paper, but in reality they continue every day in homes, streets, and hearts. You feel it. The aftermath is not an ending, but a slow unraveling. You wake to the sound of temple bells echoing through misty hills, and for a moment you imagine you've left war behind. But as you walk down into the valley, you realize the bells are not announcing peace, they're tolling for yet another rebellion. The Opium Wars didn't just weaken the empire from outside, they cracked it wide open for turmoil from within. Mainstream fact. During and after the wars, China was rocked by massive uprisings, most famously the Taiping Rebellion, 1850-1864, led by Hong Xiuquan, who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus. The movement captured vast swaths of territory and set up its capital in Nanjing. It became one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, with tens of millions dead. Quirky tidbit. Taiping followers banned practices like foot binding and even discouraged traditional hairstyles. Some outsiders noted how surreal it looked. An army of men and women with short haircuts marching under banners painted with religious slogans. Imagine a mashup of Christian hymns, martial drums, and Confucian moral codes. Part cult, part crusade, part peasant revolt. You walk into a ruined town where Taiping and Qing forces once clashed. The air still smells faintly of smoke, though. The fires burned years ago. Families sift through rubble, searching for anything usable. An intact bowl, a piece of roof tile. Children play in broken. You walk into a ruined town where Taiping and Qing forces once clashed. The air still smells faintly of smoke, though the fires burned years ago. Families sift through rubble, searching for anything usable. An intact bowl, a piece of roof tile. Children play in broken courtyards, turning wreckage into makeshift toys. You think survival has its own form of creativity, however bleak. Historians still argue whether the Taiping should be seen as proto-revolutionaries, proto-nationalists, or simply desperate peasants caught in charismatic delusion. Some admire their push for social reforms. Others condemn their fanaticism and brutality. You stand among the ruins and feel the weight of both arguments pressing down like fog. Further north, another rebellion brews, the Nian Rebellion, fueled by famine and banditry. And in the west, Muslim uprisings shake the frontiers. It feels like every region has its own fire, its own discontent. You picture the empire as a worn-out quilt, threadbare and fraying, each patch pulling away under pressure. Walking through. A countryside ravaged by war, you pass fields gone wild with weeds. Farmers, too afraid to plough, have abandoned them. You see bones scattered by the roadside, not from soldiers, but from civilians caught between armies. A dog gnaws quietly on what you choose not to look at too closely. War here doesn't feel glorious. It feels like a slow starvation of the land itself. And yet, even amid chaos, you find sparks of resilience. In a market town, women set up stalls selling millet cakes and pickled radish, keeping trade alive. In another, a schoolteacher opens his thatched classroom, insisting that children recite Confucian classics, even while rebels march nearby. It's stubborn normalcy, and it makes you smile despite the bleakness. At night, you join a group of refugees huddled around a fire. They tell stories of Taiping soldiers marching barefoot, singing hymns in accents that mix Bible verses with Chinese idioms. One woman says, "They promised a heavenly kingdom. All I saw was more graves." She stares into the flames, and you know she's lost more than she says aloud. By the time you reach Nanjing, the former Taiping capital, the city lies scarred but not silent. Birds nest in cracked walls, vines snake over old gates, and locales whisper about the days when Hong Xiuquan ruled as heavenly king. Some spit curses at his memory, others recall him with a strange mix of awe and regret. The ruins feel haunted, not by ghosts, but by unanswered questions. In the distance, the Yellow River shifts course yet again, flooding villages and leaving mudflats where fields once grew. It feels symbolic, as though even the land itself rebels against order. You sigh, realizing how fragile the empire has become, threatened not just by foreign powers, but by hunger, faith, and fury bubbling up from below. You sit on a broken wall as the sun dips low. The sky glows red, like an ember, refusing to die. Around you, cicadas drone, their endless song both soothing and unsettling. The empire staggers, you think, and you wonder how many more storms it can weather before it collapses altogether. The dust of rebellion settles only partially, and you walk into a China that feels bruised but not healed. The countryside bears scars of famine and war, while the cities grow restless with half-finished reforms. The dynasty still sits on the throne, but its power is like paper in the rain, fragile, tearing at the edges. Mainstream fact: in the aftermath of the Taiping and the Opium Wars, officials launched what became known as the self-strengthening movement. From the 1860s onward, reform-minded scholars and bureaucrats pushed for railroads, arsenals, shipyards, and schools to adopt Western science and industry while preserving Confucian values. It was modernization with one foot stuck firmly in tradition. Quirky. Tidbit: one arsenal in Shanghai produced both cannons and clocks. The workers joked that at least if the weapons failed, the Qing dynasty would still know exactly when it was losing. You chuckle with them. Dark humor seems to thrive whenever empires stumble. You step into a naval yard along the Yangtze River. Sparks fly as laborers hammer iron plates, the clang echoing like a heartbeat of industrial ambition. Western engineers shout instructions, while Chinese apprentices translate awkwardly, their tones slipping between dialects. The air smells of coal smoke and damp river breeze. You can almost taste the empire's determination to catch up. And yet, not everyone. Cheers. In a Confucian academy nearby, scholars shake their heads. Foreign machines may be strong, one mutters, but virtue is stronger. Another insists that true security comes from restoring moral order, not from imitating barbarians. Their voices rise like old crows scolding from temple eaves. Historians still argue whether the self-strengthening movement was doomed by half measures or whether it laid genuine foundations for future change. Some praise its shipyards and schools, others criticize its reluctance to reform politics, seeing it as patchwork repairs on a sinking vessel. As you travel, you glimpse the contrasts everywhere. In one town, telegraph wires hum with messages, while just beyond, peasants still plow with wooden tools behind oxen. In another, a schoolboy recites English phrases under a missionary teacher, while his grandmother at home lights incense before ancestors' tablets. Old and new rub against each other like mismatched stones. In Beijing, regents and advisors squabble. Should railways be expanded, even if they disturb feng shui and grave sites? Should schools teach chemistry alongside Confucius? Each question feels like a duel between worlds. You listen quietly, amused when one official dramatically predicts that trains will frighten away dragons. The debate pauses, then resumes. Half serious, half absurd. You spend a night in Tianjin, where foreign settlements thrive with brick houses, gas lamps, and clubs serving imported brandy. Just across the river, Chinese neighborhoods remain dimly lit, wooden, and wary. Crossing the bridge feels like stepping between centuries. You sit at a tea stall, sipping jasmine tea, while watching foreigners dance under chandeliers, and you wonder how long such a divide can last before sparks fly again. Back in the countryside, farmers grumble that taxes rise to pay for new arsenals, while their bellies remain thin. Some shrug indifferently at Western gadgets, saying, "Rice fills us better than machines." Others quietly admire the steamships, imagining what power they could wield if not monopolized by officials. Discontent grows like weeds after rain. On a cool evening, you join a group of young scholars reciting lines from both Confucian texts and translated Western books. One quotes Aristotle awkwardly, another giggles at mispronounced English. Yet, beneath the laughter lies a serious hunger. They want to learn, to adapt, to find a way out of humiliation. You sense that their energy, though scattered, may shape the decades to come. As night deepens, you sit by the river, listening to the thrum of distant machinery. The water reflects flickers of lamplight from shipyards, shimmering like a promise. And a warning. China is changing, but unevenly, uneasily. The empire has survived the storms for now, but you can feel the rumble of new tempests already building on the horizon. Spring arrives again, but it doesn't feel like renewal. It feels like a pause between storms. You wander through treaty ports where Chinese merchants haggle with foreign traders, their stalls piled high with silk, porcelain, and boxes of tea. The streets buzz with languages: English, French, Cantonese, Hokkien. Everyone seems busy, but beneath the noise lies an uneasiness you can almost touch. Mainstream fact. By the late 19th century, Western powers had secured so many rights in China, treaty, ports, extraterritorial courts, missionary protections, that many historians call it a semi-colonial state. The Qing dynasty still existed, but foreigners controlled much of the economy and diplomacy. Quirky tidbit, some treaty ports hosted horse races modeled on British tracks. Chinese onlookers gathered in silk robes, cheering for horses with names, like Eastern Lightning or Tea Blossom. Gambling thrived, of course, because why not bet on horses while your empire crumbles? You laugh quietly at the absurdity. In Shanghai, you stroll along the Bund, watching ships unload goods: coal, rifles, barrels of opium, and crates stamped with foreign logos. You sip weak beer at a riverside tavern where sailors brawl over dice. A missionary at the next table lectures loudly about salvation, ignored by everyone but the barmaid, who rolls her eyes. The scene feels almost theatrical, like a circus playing on top of a fault line. Historians still argue whether the late Qing reforms were genuine attempts at modernization or simply desperate patchwork to appease foreigners. Was China inching forward or merely delaying collapse? You sip your beer, shrug, and mutter, "Why not both?" Traveling inland, you see resentment simmering. Villagers whisper that foreigners bring devils, not gods. Secret societies sprout like mushrooms after rain, preaching resistance. The seeds of the Boxer uprising begin here, in dusty courtyards where martial artists perform rituals, claiming they can stop bullets. You can't help smirking. It sounds more like a Marvel origin story than military strategy, but their anger is real and it burns. Meanwhile, the Qing court struggles with contradictions. Officials push for new schools, railroads, and an updated army, yet corruption lingers and old elites resist change. In palace halls, courtiers bow deeply, arguing about steamships while still fearing eclipses as bad omens. You imagine the Empress Dowager raising an eyebrow, weighing every choice like a gambler clutching her last coins. You stand on a mountain overlooking villages below, smoke curling gently from chimneys. Children play in dirt alleys. Elders sip tea in courtyards. Life goes on, stubborn and cyclical, even as the empire falters. It's humbling. You realize history isn't just battles and treaties, but small acts of endurance, planting rice, lighting incense, mending clothes. As the sun sets, the horizon glows orange, shadows stretching across the land. You sense the empire's heartbeat, slower now, weaker, but not gone. The Opium Wars may feel distant, yet their aftershocks ripple endlessly, shaping each step you take. The story hasn't ended, it has only changed shape. The night grows quieter, your voice softens, your pacing slows. The story ebbs like a tide, carrying you gently toward rest. You think of lanterns floating on rivers, their flames flickering, carried downstream into darkness. You picture rice fields shimmering under moonlight, frogs croaking in chorus. You imagine smoke from forgotten pipes dissolving into the air, leaving nothing but silence. So you let yourself drift, unhurried. The battles blur, the rebellions fade, the treaties fold into dust. What remains is the steady breath of a people who endured, who bent but did not break, who carried memory forward like a candle through storms. The empire may stumble, dynasties may fall, foreign ships may come and go, but the night continues, calm, unbroken. And so, as you rest now, you leave behind the noise of history. You lie back, feeling the softness of your pillow, the rhythm of your breath. Each exhale carries away the chaos. Each inhale draws in peace. Slowly, softly, you let go. The bells fade. The river's quiet. The story settles into silence. Sleep now, without worry. The past is finished. The night is yours. Sweet dreams,